Jeez, what have I got in this box? Did I pack bricks or... Oh, I didn't see you there. I'm so sorry. It looks like you've caught me packing to move to a new cozy location. But you know what hasn't been packed up? The fire, or the coffee maker, or the good times that you can still experience here on Cozy Horror with me, Dr. Plague. Let's see what box I packed today's stories in so we can get you 5 more great stories from 5 great writers. Hold on. Let me have a look. This first story comes to us from Ambitious Gas 5691, a well-known contributor to the channel, talking about the self-hatred that exists inside all of us. So let's hear a little about the self-haunted man. The self-haunted man jostled the scraping limbs of wild and accusing foliage. The mud began to harden beneath the soles of his bare feet, stopping the flow of a crimson trail from being left behind. The voices in pursuit mingled with the slithering of creeping things and ominous cackles of predatory beasts. Had his intention been that of seeking refuge from the others who despised his life worse than he himself, the self-haunted man would have feared the shadows to which he fled. He certainly did fear them, but the darkness held so much uncertainty for his fate. He wanted those eyes of malice upon him in the torchlight. He wanted to cry out, "Here I am, let justice be done unto me, let your arms tear me away from this world." And because that was his true intention, the self-haunted man fled his captors, seeking safety. Were he hungry, he would starve. Were he clean, he would seek filth to bathe in. Were he to be confronted by gentle and good people, he would instead strike all with wrath unfounded. The self-haunted man sought now for his own destruction, to rid those that lived in this world of the hardship and desperation of any further torment from his corrupted mind. Or was it his soul? He hoped for the former, but he hoped for death more. And because he longed so much for oblivion for the sake of relieving others, the self-haunted man instead fled death for the sake of prolonging his own misery. The stars were gone, as was the moon. Blackness surrounded him, and his steps began to slow. It was because he now wanted to travel deep into the shadows, into the groping reach of whatever creature that found him appealing enough to sate its hunger. Slower and slower did the self-haunted man keep his pace, until he finally halted himself in a cold brook. Around him, the forest seemed to flee him instead. Even the wind made no attempt to touch his sweat and muck-soaked flesh. There was nothing but the moisture which stood in the air and on his breath. "Run," he commanded himself. His body did not obey. "Fall down and drown yourself." His body did not obey. Cry out so you can be found." His tongue remained still. "Help me," he pleaded, with whoever listened apart from his disobedient body. "Slay me." A light flickered in the distance for a moment, then died. A faded, clicking sound echoed. Then the spark erupted once more. In an instant, the wood was alight with the torches of a distant stranger, who immediately spied the self-haunted man. The figure lumbered through the swamp with great effort, and his form took on a monstrous quality in the rippling shadow from the flame. The self-haunted man began to back away, while the hope of his destruction filled within. Run to him, embrace him, fall to your knees, let him take you. His retreating steps quickened. He began to turn. "No!" he shouted. Sorrow filled his heart as the figure left his view, as did his chances for an end, when suddenly he heard the voice. "Flee from me! Be gone!" Horror caught hold of the self-haunted man, as not only did the words sound as though they were spoken from a wrath which haunted all the charnel houses, but his body stopped in defiance. The figure was approaching from behind him now, the squelching of mud from an irregular trod. The light of his torch revealed all the rotted bark of a desolate glade. The self-haunted man was afraid. He did not want to face this other. Somehow the thought of it was more frightening than the previous idea of the clutching abomination which lurked in the night. Yet, with these fears, turn he did. The figure hobbling towards him was cloaked in robes, smattered in grime and tattered with decay. The smell of him was vile, and the self-haunted man loathed even more his predicament, seeing how he would make no attempt to cover his nose. He breathed freely the rotten air. The eyes were the most troubling component of this menagerie, for they were alight with knowledge of itself and the world around them. This was a man. Somehow this walking desiccation was a man. The wretch spoke again, his voice softer in volume, but no less crippling to be heard, nor lacking in command. "Stay in that brook. Do not come on land with me." The self-haunted man disobeyed completely. He promptly left the cold, murky waters and stood with the wretch on dry ground. The wretch kept his gaze upon the self-haunted man while unshouldering a satchel he carried. "Do not sit." The self-haunted man disobeyed. The wretch slowly hunkered down to the earth before him and stuck the torch into the soft soil. He set the satchel into the small space between and said, "Do not open this." As not commanded, the self-haunted man pulled open the drawstring bag and found a large bread loaf and a water skin. He was relieved at the sight, even if it belonged to the wretch, but he knew that he could not make himself eat or drink. Then he heard the wretch speak for him to not do as he desired. The bread was delicious and filling. The only time he would ever eat is when he wanted to succumb to starvation. The water was pure. Likewise, he would never quench his thirst unless he gave in to death. The self-haunted man was restored, as much as he could have ever considered it possible, and yet he pondered the meaning of this charity. He wanted to thank the wretch for his mercy. He reached forward and smote his benefactor with a painful palm. The wretch looked back after the blow and simply said, "You're welcome." The self-haunted man was commanded by the wretch to stay awake throughout the rest of the night, to which he disobeyed. In the morning, the black veil over the foliage was driven away, and the swampland was revealed around the two men. The self-haunted man was glad to have rested so well, but despaired, knowing that he had the fresh vigor to unintentionally cause strife among his fellows. What were the reasons for sustaining the unsustainable? Why keep alive a flame which threatens to grow out of control? "You are a cursed man," said the wretch, "one who has set aside for a holy purpose, to which the evils of this world would know from your birth. As a child you walked in the moonlight, and that which is whole delighted in the sight of your promise. But she knew your strength was in your intent to help those who were hurting, to guide those lost into the light of the crescent moon. She severed your soul with a polished glass to which your reflection alone understands what you intend." Tears filled the eyes of the self-haunted man as he laughed at the wretch's scorn, but the wretch continued, "For you to do good, you must have to intend evil. For you to help, you mean to harm. To love without, you hate within. You could not accept this. She knew you could not accept this. But to want to do good, you would do evil." The wretch reached out and grabbed the arm of the self-haunted man. When he would have allowed this, he began to fight the wretch, struggling to pull free. He wanted to listen. He wanted to be a man sacred and a benefit to the world. But with the longing came the violence to free himself from the one man who could help him. But the wretch remained calm and held him tightly in place. The self-haunted man was embraced by the rot and stink of this vile thing. He was disgusted by him, even though he loved him. He did not want to be held by the corpse, even though he had fed him. He wanted to scream from the appalling sight of this most precious being that was able to see within and speak to the voice never heard. Instead, the self-haunted man ceased from the struggle, and in a brief moment of affection and self-reflection, he returned the embrace of the wretch. His mind was quiet. There were no commands to be disobeyed, no intention to be fled from. They were the same, soldiers in the same army, fighting in the same war. He began to sob into the rotten cowl of the wretch, and the wretch held him until he stopped. When it ended, the self-haunted man stepped away from his friend when he wanted to stay. He walked on into the day which he did not want to face. He would be among people when he wished to remain alone, but his intentions were to be sacred, to be a benefit, to be whole. Sometimes I wonder what the hardest part of moving is. Is it moving the furniture, or is it remembering which box it is that you packed everything in? I guess I'll figure it out pretty soon. This next story comes to us from Top Neighborhood 859, and it's about one of those well-worn and well-loved golems of autumn. So let's hear a little bit more about the Scarecrow. I will never tell my parents how my grandparents really died. They wouldn't believe me if I did anyway. You may not either. About a month ago, I had just gotten out of class when I checked my phone. To my surprise, it was a voicemail from my father. Sure, Mom would call me from time to time since I left for college, but when I saw that my dad had called, I knew it was bad news. I just didn't know how bad at the time. Son, we're buying you a plane ticket. You need to fly home right away. There's been an incident. Call me when you get this. That was all the voicemail said. I called them, and he explained that my grandfather had been killed in an accident with a combine while harvesting his corn. That the shock had killed my grandmother and caused her to have a heart attack as well. The flight was nerve-wracking. I've never done well in small spaces. I couldn't smoke on the flight, which made it even worse. I spent the whole flight fidgeting and walking back and forth to the restroom, even though I didn't need to go. I just needed to move around. My dad was already waiting for me when I landed, which ruined my plans of sneaking a cigarette before he showed. He gave me a hug and helped me load my bags in the car. I decided I needed a cigarette bad enough to light one up in the parking garage. My dad had never seen me smoke, and I tried to act as casual as I could about it. He raised an eyebrow as he closed the trunk. I waited for a lecture or an outburst, but all he said was, "That's a nice lighter." I hadn't realized I was still fidgeting with it. I handed him the vintage trench lighter. Ellen, my girlfriend, bought it for me a few weeks ago. Found it at an antique store in Seattle. He took it in his hand and looked at it approvingly. Then he handed it back. "No smoking in the car. Your mother'd never let us hear the end of it." My headache was gone by then, and I had a sufficient amount of nicotine in my system. I threw the cigarette down and stomped on it with my foot. An hour later, we were back at my parents' house, my mother greeting me with a hug. Then she stepped back and looked me up and down. "Your father used to smoke menthols too when he was your age," she said, giving my father a smirk. I wasn't sure if I was embarrassed that she'd caught me or surprised that Dad used to smoke. He gave me a pat on the shoulder and walked me into the house. We spent that night catching up on what I'd been doing since I was in college. They filled me in on how their business was struggling, but they were keeping their head above water. And then eventually, my dad filled me in on the details of the funeral. They had decided to do a closed casket on both my grandparents. The injuries to my grandfather had apparently been too gruesome for an open casket. They did a closed casket for my grandmother so that people would ask why. The next morning, we attended the funeral. There were only a few people there. My grandparents were in their 80s and had very few friends that were still around. Afterwards, we went back to my parents' house and ate. "Son, your mother and I have talked about it. We need to sell your grandparents' farm. We've neither the time or the money for upkeep. If you can take a week off of school and clean the place up, get it ready to sell, we will give you 25% of whatever we get from the sale." I took a large bite of chicken and chewed it over as I thought. I could call the school and explain the situation, and I could easily catch up later. "Yeah, I can do that. But what do you mean, clean it up? How bad is it?" My mother and father exchanged a worried look before she looked back at the plate. "Just before your grandparents passed, your grandmother called me. She told me that your grandfather had been diagnosed with dementia. Between that and their diminishing health, I suspect that the property's in pretty bad shape." "You haven't been out there?" I asked. It wasn't more than a couple of hours away. I couldn't believe they hadn't visited. Mom replied in a defensive tone, "We've both been working 7 days a week at the shop. We had to let our employees go. Business is not going too well." I nodded and asked what the plan was. "I'll drive you out there tomorrow. You can stay until I pick you up Friday. That gives you 6 days to get everything boxed up. I already ordered the boxes. They'll be delivered tomorrow." The following day, my father drove me up to the old farm. I spent a few weekends there as a kid. The place always had a creepy vibe, but it was fun. I could walk through the corn all day and never reach the end. As we pulled up, I saw a large scarecrow that stood over the corn at the edge of the field. "When did they get that thing?" I asked. Dad didn't answer. Instead, he looked at it out of the corner of his eye. His face contorted into a look of intense worry, maybe even fear? I couldn't tell. As we passed the scarecrow, I looked back. The wind hit it just right for a second, and I could have sworn it turned its head to watch us. About 20 minutes after he dropped me off, I was still wandering through the house, evaluating the countless knickknacks and pictures, trying to decide what should be kept, what should be sold, and what should be tossed. The phone rang, and my heart skipped a beat. It's been so long since I've heard a landline ring, I thought it might be a fire alarm. "This is Jim. I'm the delivery guy getting the boxes you ordered, but my GPS doesn't work out here. Can you give me directions?" the man asked as I answered the phone. "Head down the old country road about 5 miles. Make a right at the dirt road," I said, trying to think of any other landmarks I could give this guy. "You'll see a scarecrow. Make a right at that scarecrow." The man thanked me and hung up. About a half hour later, I was washing dishes in the sink and cleaning up the kitchen. My grandmother must have set out lunch before the accident, because there were 2 plates of food on the table. It was so rotten I couldn't even tell what it was anymore. The pungent smell of mold and rotten food was making me gag, so I had to open the kitchen window. I listened to the wind chimes on the porch and found it rather relaxing. I began to wonder how many summer days my grandparents had spent out on the porch, sipping sweet tea and listening to the wind. Over the wind chimes, I heard a scream from the field. I shut off the water and listened closer. I heard the scream again, almost as if someone was howling in pain. I rushed outside and stood at the edge of the corn. My grandfather had waited too long to harvest his crops. The sun had bleached the corn until it was now the color of bone. The stalks waved back and forth in the wind, the dry leaves rustling against each other as they swayed. I heard the noise again and began to walk out into the field towards the noise. "Hello!" I yelled. I passed row after row of maize, looking left and right in the 8 inches of space between each row. And then in the distance, I saw a figure move. I began to run after it. I caught a glimpse of the figure every few seconds as the wind allowed. After a while, I lost sight of it. I ran faster and faster, trying to catch up with whatever it was, and then I ran full speed into the scarecrow. The straw-filled body did little to dull the impact with the wooden post it was mounted on. I fell onto my back, grabbing my nose as I could feel my palm immediately filling with warm blood. I sat up and felt dizzy, my head throbbing with each beat of my heart. When I finally was able to stand up, I looked up at the scarecrow. It was probably 7 feet tall, and then another 2 feet off the ground. It was dressed in blue overalls and red flannel. The head was a burlap bag with thick red string stitching its jagged mouth and big black buttons sewn on its eyes. It was topped with a straw hat stitched with the same red string used for the mouth. The thing was pretty intimidating at 6'2". Those crows must have been terrified, I thought to myself. I pinched my nose to stop the bleeding and began to look around. I saw this scarecrow when we pulled in. There was no way I made it to the road already. I tried to hop up and see over the corn. I couldn't see anything but more corn, all the way to the horizon. As my feet hit the ground, my head felt like it might pop. Thick blood began to flow more quickly from my nose. I pinched my nose and held my head back, facing to the sky to stop the bleeding. Out of the corner of my eye, that's when I saw it. The scarecrow had turned his head to face me. I turned to face the oversized doll and figured it must have been the wind again. For a second, we made eye contact. The big button eyes seemed to be looking right at me. I told myself I was being ridiculous. It was the wind that had moved the head. It was just a bag filled with straw. It was just the wind blowing the stalks, and I imagined it had made them look like a figure running. It had even been the wind that was howling as it passed through the leaves. But still, as I stared at it, I knew it was staring back. The hair on my arm was beginning to rise, making my arms tingle. My heart began to quicken, and then the scarecrow abruptly lifted its head and looked back over the field, staring. I ran as fast as I could in the opposite direction. I stole short glances over my shoulder as I pushed through the corn. All I could see was a path of broken stalks behind me. Soon I heard a rumbling noise behind me. A truck, I thought. I kept pushing on, my lungs beginning to burn with effort. My foot caught in a shallow irrigation ditch and sent me tumbling onto the dirt driveway. The driver of the truck locked up his brakes, skidding past me as he missed me by an inch. I laid there in the dust for a few seconds. The driver got out of the truck. "What is wrong with you?" he asked. His tone was harsh and angry. I stood up to face him. He was in his mid-40s with a big beard and an even bigger beer belly. "I'm sorry, I lost my footing," I said, looking back into the field, expecting to see the monster coming out to chase me again. The man followed my gaze into the field and then looked back at me. "You high, boy?" he asked seriously. I stopped myself. Telling him I was being chased by a scarecrow would only reinforce that accusation. "I hit my head pretty hard," I said, placing a hand on my nose again. The driver nodded, then offered me a ride back to the house. "I would have been here earlier if you knew how to give directions. There weren't no scarecrow at the road," he said. We pulled up to the house and began unloading the boxes he came to deliver. "I'll be back Friday to pick them up once they're full. Your dad booked a storage shed on the other side of town. You have about 200 square feet, so keep that in mind as you pack," he said. He stared into the field. "My daddy was a corn farmer in the next county. He didn't do half as well as you did here. Actually, now that I think about it, I drove past this place last year. I remember they had a rough crop. Do you know what they did different this year?" the driver asked. "No, I'm sorry, I have no idea," I answered. He nodded and spit. "Well, take care of yourself. I'll see you on Friday." With that, he left. I went inside and grabbed a clean shirt. I washed the blood off my hands and face in the bathroom and changed. I tried to shake off the incident with the scarecrow. I must be more stressed out with the loss of my grandparents than I realized. I needed a distraction and began to pack the office downstairs. I was putting papers in a trash bag when I came across a letter my grandmother had written. "Son, I need some help with your father. The dementia's getting worse. The last 2 days he's been raving like a lunatic. This spring a man came by and offered us a scarecrow as a gift. He said it did wonders for his crops and wanted to pay it forward. Your father told him no at first, thinking the man was a swindler, but he insisted he didn't want anything in return. Your father is now convinced that the scarecrow is the reason we had such a great crop this year, but the scarecrow won't let him harvest it. I left you several voicemails about this, and you haven't called me back, so I thought I would write you. Please, come help. I'm worried about your father. Mom." I put the letter down and sat in the office chair. I could dismiss my experience with the scarecrow as just stress or an overreactive imagination, but my grandfather having similar worries about the same scarecrow? What are the odds, I thought to myself. I needed a cigarette. I went outside to the porch and lit one. I took a long drag before exhaling. A cool breeze blew by, bringing the wind chimes to life. I turned around to look at them and see if one would be worth keeping. That's when I saw it. The scarecrow was just 20 feet away in the field. It hung on its post, staring at me. While I was trying to process this, it fell down. Well, more like hopped down. Immediately the post went up and then disappeared into the field. It couldn't be alive, I thought to myself. Seconds later, the scarecrow came out of the corn. It began running across the lawn, carrying the 10-foot post like a Trojan soldier running with a spear. The scarecrow launched the post. It sailed across the yard and missed me by a foot. It took down the wind chimes and impaled the wall behind me. I turned to run inside, but the post was now blocking my entrance. I hopped the rail on the porch and ran towards the old barn. I could hear the scarecrow running behind me, gaining on me, the straw rustling under his overalls and flannel. Once I was inside the barn, I tried to close the door, but it stuck fast from years of neglect. I grabbed the closest thing I could find as a weapon, a pitchfork. The scarecrow entered the room. Its jagged mouth and button eyes now seemed much more menacing as it marched towards me. I rammed the pitchfork into its chest as hard as I could. It pierced deep into its body easily, but it seemed to have no effect. With its left hand, or burlap mitten really, it grabbed my arm. The thing was impossibly strong. It used its right hand to pull the pitchfork out and then turned it towards me. I struggled uselessly against its grip. I desperately searched my pocket for something I could use as a weapon. I took my lighter out and flipped the top open. The flame caught almost instantly. In seconds, the scarecrow was fully engulfed. I let him go and fled into the field. The field was burning in less than an hour. The fire department said it was overly dry because it wasn't harvested on time. They didn't really have any interest in investigating the matter further. My father saw the post stuck in the wall when he picked me up. I knew he recognized it as the scarecrow's post because he didn't ask any questions about how it had gotten thrown through the wall and how the field had burned down. I know on some level he suspected the scarecrow killed his parents. I know on some level that he's grateful I killed it. But I know we will never discuss it because people would think we were crazy. You know, the rain makes such a wonderful backdrop for our stories and for our time together. But I'll tell you flatly, it's not a lot of fun to move boxes through. I think soggy boxes are something that I'm definitely not going to miss, though I've already been informed that my new cozy cabin has about a 90% chance of rain daily, so don't worry, your backdrop will still be there after the move. Coming to us from a fellow talented narrator, from Cryptids Roost, in fact, for those of you who've heard his great stories, let's hear a story about a monster. I know, very, very untread ground. However, I think you'll find that this monster is a little better than the rest. So let's learn a little more about the Ravenwood Monster. The small town of Ravenwood was plagued by a terrifying creature known as the Dogman. It was said to be a creature that was half man, half dog, with glowing red eyes and razor-sharp teeth. It was a creature of legend, but the people of Ravenwood knew it was all too real. It had been attacking and killing their livestock for months, and the town was in a state of crippling fear. The citizens couldn't go one night without hearing the next dawn of one of their own picked away in the night. Who among them, they always wondered, could stand against such a terrifying scourge? The beast, this Dogman, he'd proven to be too much for even the police to handle. That is until one man decided to stand up from the crowd. Jack, a young man known for his bravery and hunting skills, decided that he was going to put an end to this, but he couldn't go alone. He gathered a team of the best hunters he could find in town, far and wide, and they set out into the woods to hunt the Dogman. As they entered the wood, the atmosphere was eerie, and the air was thick with tension. On all sides, the trees around them were thick, close together, boxing them in. Looking around, each and every one of them knew that they were not going to get out of this forest. There was no turning back. Only they or the Dogman would leave alive. They knew they were facing an extremely dangerous creature, and they were aware that this may be their very last hunt. They set up camp and began to track the Dogmen. They searched for days, but it was as if the creature had vanished into thin air. One night, as they sat around the campfire, discussing their next move, They heard a blood-curdling howl in the forest. They knew they had found their target. But where? That sent a chill down their spine. They quickly packed up the camp and set out to track the howl. As they followed the howl deeper into the woods, the trees grew thicker and the darkness more intense. But they knew they were getting close. Suddenly they came across a clearing, and in the center of the clearing stood the beast. It was even more terrifying than the legends had described. It stood on its hind legs, towering over the hunters, and its glowing red eyes locked onto its prey. Each of the men stood, despite each of them being hardened men who had seen the likes of the vile and rabid game. They had never before seen something so terrifying, so gargantuan, so tyrannical as the dog man that stood before them now. They could feel, each of them, this thing's burning red eyes peering straight through their corneas, straight through their brains, into their hearts. "That's it," said Jack, his heart pounding in his chest. "That's the dog man." The hunters raised their weapons and prepared to fire, but the dog man was too fast. With lightning speed it charged at them, its razor-sharp teeth bared, ready to rend flesh from bone. The hunters fired, but their bullets seemed to have no effect on the creature. "We have to take it down," Jack shouted. The hunters fought bravely, but they were no match for the dog man. It was far too strong, far too fast, and just far too ferocious. Jack was thrown to the ground, and he thought that it was the end of him. He watched as two of his other companions were slammed into a tree, instantly crushing their skulls to paste. The third, Jack watched in horror as the dog man lifted the poor bastard by the head and ripped it clean from its shoulders, dousing them both in warm metallic crimson. Jack had all but given up hope. There was nothing he could do. The men were dead, and the dogmen would have him next. The dogman approached, the ground shaking with fear of every step. Snarling, he opened his mouth. Suddenly, Jack remembered something his grandfather had told him. He remembered the legend of the dogman and how it may be defeated. For, like many creatures of native lore, they all bore a very distinct weakness to silver. With a surge of strength, Jack rose to his feet and pulled out his silver knife. The dogman turned to face him, snarling defiantly, and Jack plunged the blade into his heart with a furious roar. The creature let out a blood-curdling howl and fell to the ground, dead. Jack stood, adrenaline forcing his heart to thump and pound in his chest, harder than it had ever before. "We did it," Jack said, his voice shaking with emotion. "The town is saved." He returned to Ravenwood as a hero. He was greeted with cheers and congratulations from the townspeople. Jack went to see the mayor to report what had happened. "Jack! Oh God, Jack, I can't thank you enough," the mayor said, a look of relief plastered on his face. "The dog man had been terrorizing our town for so long. You've saved us all." "It was my pleasure, sir," Jack replied, "but I couldn't have done it without the help of my men. God rest their souls." The mayor nodded. "You're right. This is a team effort. They were brave men who gave their lives, and I want to make sure that everyone is recognized for their bravery. I'll be holding a town meeting tomorrow to present medals of honor to you and holding a memorial for the rest of your team." Jack couldn't believe it. He had never thought of himself as a hero, but to the town he now was. He felt a sense of pride and accomplishment wash over him. But their victory was short-lived. They soon realized that the dogman was not the only creature terrorizing the town. The legend of the werewolf was also true, and it had been seen recently in the forest. Jack knew that he would have to act fast before it did any real harm to the town. He set out again into the forest to hunt the werewolf. This time he was better prepared, and he had silver bullets on hand for when he inevitably came face to face with the beast. He searched for days, but the werewolf was elusive. The werewolf was far more agile than the dogman before him. One night, as he sat around the campfire, pondering his next move, when a blood-curdling howl echoed through the woods, just as the dogman's had. It was even more terrifying than anything he'd ever heard. It was a howl that even would have given the dog man pause. And before he knew what was happening, its eyes, its burning yellow eyes, were fixed upon his. The young hunter, the hero, raised his weapon and fired, but the werewolf was far too fast, bounding from treetop to treetop. From one, it bounded like a panther towards the other, with its teeth and claws bared. He fired his silver bullets. After a few, perhaps 3 or 4 misfires, his aim came true, and the werewolf let out a final howl before crashing to the ground dead. Jack felt a sense of relief wash over him. He had finally put an end to another terror that had plagued the town. He looked at it and looked back towards the town, imagining the same relief in the eyes of the townspeople. He had done it, once again. And as he made his way back to town, he was again greeted as a hero. The town threw a huge celebration in his honor, and once more the mayor presented him with a medal. Jack felt a sense of pride and accomplishment, but as he looked back towards the townspeople, he couldn't help but feel a twinge of sadness. He knew that this wasn't the end. There would be other monsters out there, lurking, and other battles that he would have to fight. But for now, he was content to bask in the glory of his victory. As the days went by, Jack became known as the Monster Hunter of Ravenswood. He was called upon whenever there was any kind of creature, any kind of behemoth monstrosity terrorizing the town, and he always answered the call, ready to face whatever gargantuan plagued the city. In the years to follow, Jack faced many challenges, but he would always emerge the victor. He became a legend in his own right, and his name was passed down through many glorious generations of the town. But for Jack, it was never about the glory or the fame. It was about protecting the innocent and keeping his community safe, and that was a duty he would always be willing to undertake, no matter the cost. And so, Jack continued to hunt monsters, his courage and determination never faltering, always ready to face whatever horrors lay ahead. Let's see. Was that the box I was packing the raven-shaped candles in, or was that the box I was packing the ghost-shaped candles in? Maybe that's the universe's way of telling me that I've just got too many candles. This next story comes to us from, Harbinger 51. He does write a mean tale, as some of you will remember. And this one is certainly no exception. So let's hear a little bit more about how the plants in the garden never grew any vegetables. It was the 5th year. The 5th freaking year. Every summer since I moved into this place, I've always made an attempt to grow a garden. The thoughts of picking fresh vegetables out of my own yard brought me back to my childhood. In my opinion, they always taste better grown that way. On top of that, it seemed like every single person in the neighborhood had their own lush garden. I could go down a list of reasons why I wanted to grow one. For whatever reason I might use, I believe the work needed to prepare the soil, plant the seeds, and tend to water and weed was well worth it. I want to make this known so you'll understand my frustration when I tell you that I've not harvested a single vegetable from my garden. I do everything right. All the plants are in the perfect place for sunlight. I always make sure they have enough water. What doesn't make any sense is that the plants themselves grow just fine. They grow tall and healthy, showing their beautiful green colors to the neighborhood. I've switched it up plenty of times through the years. I've tried to grow corn, cucumbers, zucchini, radishes, tomatoes, peppers of every kind you can imagine. None of them bore a single thing the whole time they grew. This was the one thing I wanted, ever since I could even contemplate the possibility of owning my own house. I had dreams of growing my very own garden. Well, I finally snapped. It was Halloween. Summer was over, and the weather was turning sour by the day. I had just gotten home from a long day at work. Sitting on my porch was a bowl of Kit Kats for the early trick-or-treaters. Enjoying the sunset as I read a book, I began to think about the failures in my garden. I was becoming stressed out and frustrated at the mere thought of it. I set my book down and went into my garden to get a shovel, angrily marching over to my dying garden. If you're not going to grow me anything, I might as well dig you up and start over, I thought. The thought came over me as I plunged the shovel into the dirt. I almost said it out loud, as if the garden could hear me or something. I put more emotion behind each thrust, putting in more momentum and driving my foot with all the force I could muster, digging deeper as I went. As I kept going, I lost myself in anger, but after a few minutes of this, I realized I couldn't believe I was taking out my anger on my garden. It was only a garden. I slowed down. I was about to stop before my shovel hit something solid. I heard a thump of impact. It wasn't a rock. I jabbed the shovel twice more and heard the same thump-thump both times. Interested, I dug around and scooped out some dirt with my hand, ripping apart networks of small roots to reveal a wooden plank. It didn't appear to be on its own, more like part of a large structure, a box or something. My emotional state turned from anger to excitement. Maybe I hadn't been able to grow a garden in the yard, but I might have just found someone's hidden treasure. I dug even faster in my excited state. Now that my anger was gone, I flung dirt all over, not even remaining attentive enough to keep nice, neat piles. I furiously worked to uncover the surface of the box and found its edges. The thought about what could be inside rattled around in my mind. The worst part was cutting through all the roots to get to the thing. I had a hard time pulling most of them out with my hands, having to use the shovel to chop at them first. Then I took a step back, getting the whole picture. I immediately noticed its shape. It was that of a casket. It was an old one, or at least a makeshift wooden one. I stared at it in disbelief. This house wasn't that old. Why would there be a casket in the yard? It didn't seem possible at the moment. I shrugged the shape off as just being an odd one. I chopped at the roots that crawled around the edges, finishing them off. Reaching down slowly, I gripped the side of the casket and flipped it open. A set of empty eye sockets looked back at me, though what remained of the casket was far from a skeleton. Beside the skull, the rest of the naked body still had plenty of flesh remaining. Too much flesh. The corpse had the musculature of a bodybuilder, more definition than I'd ever seen on a living person. Its organs were visible, barely contained by the muscle tissue around them. Everything about the supposed corpse, besides the head, looked like it was still alive, but the shape of the bone structure seemed inhuman. Its veins were shown clearly through the entire body, and it lacked skin. Each one was connected to roots that crawled around its entire body, roots that filled the rest of the space in the coffin. I knelt just to get a closer look, but I started to hear something. I leaned in further, almost touching this grotesque corpse. I stopped my breathing to listen. The rhythmic beat of a heart filled my ears. I gasped, jerking myself up and stepping back. I felt my own heart beat faster and faster as it rose in my chest, and I found myself breathing rapidly in fright. I ran inside and grabbed the phone, my fingers dialing 911. 911, what's your emergency? I found a casket with a body in it in my yard, but there's something wrong with it. I proceeded to give the operator my location, and she assured me that the police were en route, only minutes away. After the call ended, I ran outside again to my freshly dug up garden. I was stopped dead in my tracks. My eyes felt like they were about to burst from my skull as I looked before me to see the casket with no corpse. All that remained were the roots, still mended by the body they had been strung across, surrounding what was now only space in an empty casket. It was gone. I looked up, my eyes darting around, spinning my head in all directions. A chill crawled up my spine, and I tensed up as I searched for the corpse. It was nowhere to be seen. The cops pulled up to my house a few minutes later, and 2 officers stepped out of their vehicle. I saw them but paid little attention, still scanning around. You the one who called it in? Well, yeah, I did, but it's not here. When you called, you said there was a dead body, correct? I did, yeah, but it's not here. See? I pointed to the hole in my garden. The officers approached, but stopped at the edge, both leaning in to get a peek. They displayed confused expressions. The other officer, who had yet to say anything, let out a single chuckle as if he found this ridiculous, before shaking his head and turning the other way, the other side, and looked towards me. Are you aware it's illegal to abuse the use of 911? I don't abuse anything, sir. There was a body here just a few minutes ago. I don't know. You don't know what? What happened to it? You thought it would be cute to set up a little casket, Halloween decoration style, and report a dead body to us. You dig it up now to make a little display just for us? No, well, yeah, I just dug it up, but this made me think of something. I looked back at the hole, realizing my shovel was nowhere to be seen. Something hit my back. Felt like a droplet of water from a sprinkler. A scream followed from one of the officers. Turning back, I made eye contact with the cold, dead eyes of the first officer and the tip of the shovel that ran through the head, splitting it apart. The shovel was ripped from the back of his skull, and his body fell, head landing at my feet. I was now once again looking at the empty eye sockets of the corpse that had been under my garden. I turned towards the other officer who had drawn his gun. The sound of the first shot shocked me so much, I fell to the ground. The officer popped off bullet after bullet as he retreated to his car, each one connecting with the muscles on the body. The corpse didn't so much twitch in reaction. It kept its slow, steady pace, walking towards the officer. The officer paused, taking a moment to make a well-placed shot. It grazed the top of the corpse's skull and took a chunk with it. This seemed to anger it. In one swift, lightning-quick motion, it raised the shovel and threw it like a javelin, gliding through the officer before bursting through the windshield of the patrol car, pinning him to it. While this happened, I had enough time to draw the gun out of the other officer's holster. By the time I had it, I looked up to see the empty eye sockets of the corpse looking back at me. I booked it to my front door, but by my account, it didn't have any interest in a chase. As soon as I was inside, I slammed the door shut and locked it, grabbing my phone and heading for the kitchen, which had the back door to the house. I dialed 911 again, checking the chamber for a round while the phone rang. 911, what's your emergency? Yeah, I just called a little while ago. Your officers were just murdered right before my eyes. The thing that killed them is outside my house right now. It killed them with a shovel. With a shovel! I screamed into the phone as I kept the gun raised in the direction of the entryway. You need backup. Lots and lots of backup. Please, get here soon. It's... A boom echoed through the house. I trembled at the sudden noise, raising the gun in my shaking hands that held it. The front door creaked open, and footsteps followed. They only took a few steps inside before they stopped. It's been a long, long time. It could talk. I didn't expect that. I tried to reason with it. What do you want? It seemed to ignore me. All this time, dreaming of this day, the day I would rise and feast on the world once again. Oh, it feels good. I don't want to go back. I began to shake even harder, looking over at my back door, ready to make a run for it any second. Of course, I have you to thank for all this. I looked back to see the corpse staring at me from across the hall. I just needed the fuel, and if it weren't for you, I wouldn't have gotten it. You feeding me all those years, preparing me for this day. Oh, come on, boy. Haven't you always wanted your own little garden? Here I am. The flesh that bound the bottom jaw to the top retracted back. It was smiling at me. I felt dazed, like I was about to throw up. It turned its head back to the front door. Sirens began to approach from the distance. It could tell. It knew they were coming. I took the opportunity, swinging the door open and sprinting through the backyard and the first row of trees that separated me from the neighbors. I ran faster than I could think. Through backyard after backyard, I sprinted. Gunfire erupted from behind me, but I kept going. It sounded as if a war had broken out, and a battle was taking place in my neighborhood. Soon I emerged into the next street, but I kept running.
I forgot all about the handgun I was holding. A kid in a Jedi costume noticed, dropping his plastic lightsaber and plastic pumpkin full of candy, screaming as he ran away from me. The dozen or so other kids and some of the adults who accompanied them on the street noticed it too. They screamed and ran as well. I thought about saying something, but I didn't bother. Being scared and on the move was probably for their own good. They didn't know what was behind me. A man emerged from a house in front of me with a shotgun and aimed it at my head. "Stop right there." I did as he said, aware of the situation that I seemed to have created. I raised my right hand with the gun above my head and did the same with my left, showing him my empty palm. "Listen, something's coming. I didn't shoot anyone, I swear. We got to get out of here, or stop it, or..." "What in the hell are you doing, waving a gun around, scaring all these kids out trick-or-treating? Drop the gun right now." Not wanting to get a face full of buckshot in the street, I dropped the handgun and kept my hands raised. The man turned back inside his house, and I could faintly hear him tell somebody to call the police. He turned back towards me, adjusting his aim. Something caught his attention, and he looked slightly to the left before something collided with his face and knocked him to the ground. It exploded on impact and spewed an orange substance everywhere. It was a pumpkin. I looked to my right to see the corpse walking towards me. It was bleeding profusely and had many obvious holes ripped in its tissue and an even larger chunk torn out of its skull. In one hand it held a jack-o'-lantern. With the other, it pointed at me. "I'm not finished with you yet," it yelled to me. I glanced down. The gun was only a leaping distance away. It seemed like my only choice. I dove, but something hit me before I could make it. It threw the other pumpkin. It fell apart when it hit me, pieces of its shell flying around. I fell on my back and began to gasp for air. It had knocked the wind out of me, and I could tell at least a few ribs had been broken. I felt achy all over my body. It even hurt my neck, and I turned to look at the corpse as it approached me. A gunshot rang through the air, and the corpse stumbled back. It recovered and rose, only to be shot again, this time tripping and falling to the ground. I flipped myself over and began to push myself from the ground. It took 2 attempts to get myself up. I looked up to see a woman on the porch, holding the shotgun the man had been aiming at me. I then looked back down and locked eyes on the handgun. I picked it up as I stumbled back to my feet. I was still shaking and in pain. It limited my ability to hold the sight straight, and I knew I couldn't be very accurate, but I wasn't far from my target. I shot rapidly, some bullets making contact, some just hitting the ground. Behind me, the woman continued to blast the corpse with the shotgun. I was empty, and with her last shell, she shattered the skull to pieces. Its black brains spattered out and painted the pavement. The corpse wasn't moving anymore. I retreated to the porch of the house next to the one with the woman holding the shotgun, keeping my empty gun trained on the now lifeless corpse. More sirens were approaching. After a few minutes, I sat on the stairs and lowered my gun, setting it on the step beside me. I dearly hoped it was finally over. An armored police truck pulled up onto the street we were on, and followed by a caravan of all sorts of emergency vehicles. Ambulances, fire trucks, and even police from some of the other towns around ours. Some stopped on our street, some moved on to my street. The police that stepped out of the armored truck were equipped with heavy body armor and rifles. They surrounded the corpse in the street. The woman on the porch screamed for the paramedics. A few of them ran to her and her husband lying on the ground. I heard the woman cry out in relief and thank them over and over again when one of them said that her husband was going to be all right. I got up and limped my way over to them. I talked with the paramedics for a while and let them know how injured I was. "You're going to have to wait. There are others with more life-threatening injuries, and we need to attend to them." I didn't respond, except for nodding my head. I overheard someone else in the crowd, a first responders, say, "We got 7 dead officers and a dozen dead civilians, with twice that many injured. We don't know how the hell this happened." Hearing this, I lowered myself to the curb, sitting down gently to not hurt myself worse. I watched the woman walk with the paramedics as they carried her husband on a stretcher into the ambulance. She waited outside as they shut the door. She watched the ambulance leave before taking a seat next to me on the curb. I tried to muster something to say, failing horribly. I wanted to apologize to her for what had happened to her husband, but I didn't know what to say. Sorry I dug up that monster in my yard. I didn't think anyone, including myself, was ready to process that. Looking at the side of their house, I opted for a different topic of conversation. That's a lovely garden you have. She laughed, looking over at it like I was. She paused for a moment and let out a sigh. Yeah, it might look lovely, but I don't know what's wrong with it. Ever since we moved into this place, the plants we grow have never given us anything. We haven't gotten a single vegetable. Must be something in the dirt.
One more story, and then I think it's going to be time to pack myself off for a little nap. We've saved a good one for last, though, coming to us from CrimsonBayonet. It's a story about a bored child's mind and the places that it sometimes goes. So let's hear a little more about the Parkour Man. The year is 1999. I was only 5 at the time, but I remember seeing it for the first time. A man who was parkouring and keeping up with the car. It would leap great distances and land every single jump. They would also grab swings and poles and run along the telephone wires. I was so invested in this imaginary being that I would name them Parkour Man. I'm almost certain anyone reading this has done the same in some capacity. But I never really thought too deeply about it, or why this was a phenomenon that we all share. Like the cool S that everyone used to draw, no one knows the origin of that parkour guy. Ever since I've gotten older, my ability to imagine the guy has gotten worse and worse, and eventually it stopped existing altogether. That is until last week. Monday of last week, to be exact. So ever since I was a child, I would get crazy migraines and body pains. I would also complain to my parents, saying how much it hurt, but they always chalked it up to growing pains or ADHD. Strangely enough, the pains and migraines started to become less and less frequent as I got older. This was the same time I started seeing less and less of the Parkour Man. Fast forward, and I'm now 29 and starting to get random pains and migraines again that I can't explain. So I did the adult thing and went to a doctor about my issues. They did some tests on my blood pressure and a urinalysis, and the doctor called me after a day or two. To my surprise, he told me I was just dehydrated and to drink plenty of water. I drink about a gallon of water a day. I don't know how I'm dehydrated. Eventually, my migraines became so frequent, my wife would be the one driving me around because I couldn't focus on the road with the pain I was in. Monday was when I started to see it again. The Parkour Man jumping from streetlight to building and down. Graciously tumbling and climbing. However, he was different this time. The parkour guy I knew wore a ninja mask and wore black clothes, but this one was just a silhouette, and he was constantly staring at me. I looked at my wife as we were going to my next appointment to resolve the problem and asked, "Have you ever looked out the window of a moving car and seen one of those imaginary parkour guys running alongside?" "Well, yeah, I do vaguely, but my life was different when I was a kid, and I couldn't sit still. I haven't in a while, but I imagine I would if I had to ride passenger all the time." She laughed, and I laughed along with her. I didn't tell her that he looked different, or that it was staring at me, or that I saw him at all. The doctor that day was confused about how I was still dehydrated, and prescribed me pills that would help with water retention. My health has declined, and I was starting to feel weaker and weaker as the day went by. Each day felt like I was crawling to get by, and my energy was way down. 3 nights ago, I was awoken by a strange sound coming from the kitchen. My head was pounding and my mouth was dry and sticky. That sound was probably the migraines playing tricks on me, so I would get up and get some water, I told myself, to calm my nerves more than anything. I slowly stumbled to the fridge where we kept a gallon of filtered water for when I needed something to drink, and I also grabbed a couple of Tylenol quick releases to help with the pain. I put the pills in my mouth and drank so much water I had to gasp for air. After I closed the fridge, I heard another strange sound, but this one was outside on my back porch. My porch is about 30 feet off the ground because the house is built on a steep hill. I walked with one eye open to see what it was. I looked around with the blurry vision I had and saw it hanging from my porch, staring at me, though I could only see the top of its fingers and its eyes. Its face was always blank or blurry, but this time I could see its deep black eyes and pale skin. There was a sheen of water on top of its head. I slowly backed away, thinking this may be a hallucination due to fever or pain. I just went back to bed and tried my best to ignore it. The next day I got up and went to the kitchen for more water, and I looked at the porch. The door was wide open. There was no sign of forced entry either, only a single set of footprints entering the home and vanishing once it passed the rear door. Ever since seeing that, I had a strange feeling I was being watched, no matter if I was inside or outside. I could feel it watching me with those black eyes. Throughout the day, I kept experiencing the feeling of unease and dread. The day seemed to drag on, and now and then I would catch a glimpse of the man in the mirror or the glass. I had another appointment that morning and needed to leave. My headache had gotten worse, but the pain and fatigue had been getting better. While inside the car, I laid my head against the cool glass, which gave me a moment of reprieve from the heat and the migraine that I'd been dealing with. I usually closed my eyes, but the feeling of being watched kept me from dropping my guard and sleeping. Looking through the window, I could see it standing in front of the car. This time, I got to see its whole face. Pale white skin with deep black eyes, but no mouth or nose. He only had holes on the sides of his head, which I assumed were his ear holes. Seeing it standing in front of the car shocked me to my core, and I screamed in terror. My wife tried to comfort me by showing me there was nothing there. She stepped out of the car and stood right where it did, and he disappeared behind her. "See, hun? You're just going through delirium due to dehydration. I love you. It's going to be okay." She spoke in a calming voice. However, I knew better. I knew it was real. I don't know what it wanted, but I could feel it was waiting for me to be alone. As we pulled away, I could see its blank, expressionless stare as it stood in our driveway, watching me right away. As we traveled the old streets in the downtown section of my city, I would catch a glimpse of it, staring at me and not moving. It would be on top of a building. Cold, expressionless eyes would meet me and cause me dread and anxiety, as if it was there and there was nothing I could do. I tried my best to look away, but every time I would, it would show up in the center of my vision. I tried closing my eyes, but I could still see it in my head, staring. We arrived at the doctor's office, an off-tan building with a blue tin roof. A sign on the building in an orange hue declared it to be Mercy Medical Center, and it was shining with light. I felt my fear response speak in my chest, telling me not to enter the place, as I was going to die by walking in. The gates of Tartarus were standing in front of me, wanting me all the more. My wife tugged on my shirt and held my hand, guiding me through, her face shining through my fuzzy vision. With her help, I was able to get to my doctor and start talking. Before we started, I had to sign a few forms, which I couldn't remember what was for. An experimental drug, but it was supposed to help. This is a new type of drug meant to target the part of the brain that controls blood pressure and nerves. Seems that your blood pressure is really high, and this should bring it down. We can only guess that it's a hypertensive crisis that's been drawn out for a week, but Since the condition is pretty scary, we've been trying to get you into whatever we can to monitor you. I can give you a shot to take this medication, get it working now, and it'll last all day until around 6 a.m. He pulled out a syringe and plunged it gently into my arm. I sighed in relief as the medicine coursed through my veins. I could feel the pressure of my head reducing and the fuzzy blur starting to sharpen and fade away. I shook his hand and left with my wife. It was such a relief. I cried on the car ride home, being able to look out into the bright midday sky and feel the warmth of the sun on my skin without any of it being overbearing on my body. Best of all, it was no longer in sight, and the feeling of dread and overwhelming anxiety was fading into obscurity. Before we got home, we stopped at the local CVS to get the prescription needed. I got home, and the colors were brighter than normal, and everything felt better, cleaner, fresher. The lights in my room were clearer, and the smell of the home felt more crisp. Everything was fine, with no sign of it, and I just forgot all about it as well. I let my guard down. Last night, my dreams were a vivid tapestry of vibrant colors and motions that only Van Gogh could illustrate. It was surreal and amazing, however, this bliss that came to an abrupt stop when I was awoken by my wife's crying. "What's wrong, honey?" I said in a worried tone. The only thing illuminating the room was a soft green light shining from the alarm clock, saying it was 3 a.m. "It wants you, but you keep running. Why do you keep running?" she said. What do you mean?" I said, as I reached towards her hand to move them off her face. As her hands pulled down, I stared in abstract horror. Her eyes were missing, and ink ran down her face. "It needs you." My wife, what I thought was my wife, started to contort vocally and physically. Her bones snapped like fresh celery, and her voice became static as she brought her arms over her head to grab the bottom of her jaw and pull it sharply, ripping it off. The bed was flooded by her warm, viscous blood. In my horror, she kept crawling towards me, crying, asking me to stop taking the medicine. I looked towards the nightstand and saw it standing in the background, smiling at me from a mouth made from tattered flesh and gnarled teeth and the same black eyes. Before I could take the medication, it grabbed my wrist and leaned in close. "You have seen so much. You'll run out eventually, and when you do, I'll welcome you into the void." The searing pain left a black mark on my arm, and I reeled away, and as it just stood there, staring at me. I grabbed the pills and took one quickly, hoping the nightmare would end. It was when I woke up from the dream. My wife was there, sleeping soundly, and I reached over to see her face, but it was normal. I got up to go to the bathroom and wash my face for a minute. The cold water woke me up more. The sudden realization made me almost vomit, knowing what I was seeing was as real as it felt. I looked down at my arm. It's a handprint. It's black on my arm, like a fresh tattoo. I only have 30 days of pills, with my doctors no re-upping on them since they're experimental. Even typing this now, I can see him on my black screen, staring at my every move. What do you do when you meet an impossible situation like this? And just like that, our spooky tales have come to an end. Don't worry, though. I'm sure we'll see each other again for more cozy horror and more great times. Until then, this is Dr. Plague wishing you a wonderful day and a spooky evening.